Good evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and call the Monday, February 6th special called meeting of the San Marcos CISD Board of Trustees to order at 6:02 p.m. We do have quorum, and it's my understanding that Dr. Salmi is on her way, and unfortunately, due to an illness, Ms. Cantu will just be watching this evening and not joining us via Zoom. If you'll excuse me or pardon me while I get situated, I just drove in from Austin. So the first item on our agenda this evening is a Pledge of Allegiance to the American and Texas flags. You'll please join me. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under the Texas flag, pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one indivisible. Next item on our agenda is public forum. I don't see any blue cards. Do we have anyone signed up for public forum? All right. On to the next item. Presentation by the Facility Assessment and Long Range Planning Committee on educational and facility needs of the district.
Okay, good evening, Board of Trustees, Dr. Cardona. Before we begin with the committee findings, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank the committee members. Obviously, their attendance, we had a lot of great discussion. Their interest in the needs of the district is critical, and we appreciate their involvement. To Perkins and Will and to Mr. Robert Tejerina for the advice and the guidance along the way, as well as the ability to answer questions and answer them very quickly. And then finally to Mr. Richard Duval and his maintenance team, the HVAC technicians, electricians. Their knowledge of what's going on in this district was key to getting this project done, and they work on the equipment daily, so they know what the needs are. So with that, I'm going to introduce Mr. Michael Pigg. Pastor Pigg has volunteered to present the committee's findings this evening. So Mr. Pigg.
All right. Well, again, I'm Michael Pigg, and so we had several meetings together. I'm just going to take you through the slides and sort of explain what we talked about. Sort of an overview of the process was we gathered at several different schools in the district, looked at the campuses, took campus tours, heard from principals, vice principals about sort of the needs of their campuses. Some of those were about fine arts facilities, and some of them were about athletic facilities. And Cash basically just showed off because he principals the newest school in the district, and we were all terribly impressed with that campus. So after having met at those four places, so we started out at Mendez, and then we went to where did we go to?
Goodnight.
Rodriguez, that's the second one, and then we went to Goodnight, and then we had actually the last one was a Zoom call. So because well, I don't know if y'all remember, it was frozen for about 90 minutes, and now we're back to 70-degree weather. So those were good conversations. For the most part, they were very informative. The fellows from Perkins and Will were very helpful in informing us of all the requests from principals and conversations they'd had with admin and staff, and then their own facility tours. And so we get to sit in and listen to those things. We talked about educational assessment, physical assessment, and financial assessment, and then we kind of put all those together, and they gave us plans, options, if you will. And so, but they had asked us first, what were our biggest concerns? The four biggest concerns were security, equity across the district, future readiness, and academic vision. So you can see that capacity, financial stewardship, large maintenance projects, competitive with other districts, and innovative programs were some of the concerns, but those four largest ones were, again, security, equity, future readiness, and academic vision. So that's kind of how we went forward as we looked at the plans. These are basically, we gathered in the library at Goodnight, and they printed out large sheets that kind of told us what each plan was, and we had options A through F, I think it was. And we were allowed to have open discussion about it, walk around, and those little green dots that you see on there we got to say, this matters to me. I think this is important. I've heard discussion on this. And so that's kind of what we looked at in terms of the options. There were some that were very conservative. I think the lowest number at the top there in terms of millions of dollars was let's see, $95 million, which would have kept us, we were instructed that at $96 million we have to raise taxes. And then and they told us kind of incrementally what that would look like. I believe our district lawyer is here to tell us more about that here in just a minute. But so we kind of had this picture of what we could accomplish at what level of increase of taxes, and what the needs were across the district. We began to talk about an auditorium. We talked about an expansion to the high school that would satisfy 200 kids more. We even had sidebar conversations about would that be important for making a freshman wing or something of that nature. And so we had some really great conversations and some input from administrators and people who actually live on these campuses and work on these campuses, and so it was very helpful. And it was really option B that stuck out the most, and most people were excited about option B. It also happened to be the one that is $173 million. And so there was a lot going into that. And there were some concerns in our conversations about, passing a bond and those sort of things. And it was really great conversation. There wasn't much tension. We didn't get into really any tension except when we started talking about a support for Mendez K through 8 campus. And we had to go to administration to get some clarification on that. We took some polls amongst ourselves, and those polls were kind of, all over the place, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those. You can see actually how the votes went as we talked about that, because we got concerned about what would that K through 8 campus look like, how many kids would it house. In the end, the option that we looked at suggested that we could house about 200 to 240 kids in a 6 through 8 building block on the campus of Mendez Elementary, and everybody on the committee agreed that Mendez really needed something. We had met on that campus. We had talked to those administrators. I've stood in that courtroom or that courtyard and worried that I was going to fall through the bricks because they're pulling away from the wall. I started painting a mural with a group of people a couple of years ago, and we haven't completed it because we were afraid to put ladders there because we were afraid that they'd fall through the brick. And so maintenance has had to deal with that over and over. And so there was a lot of talk about those kind of things, concerns for those kind of things. There was some conversation about the situation with the bathrooms at Hernandez Elementary and how they needed an overhaul. So it was really just a wide scoping conversation. But ultimately support for option B with a K through 8 at Mendez led the discussion, and some talk about a K through 5 and leaving out the K through 8 option. But there was support for an auditorium or an outside pool, and we kind of went back and forth on which would be the better option there. A need for performing arts expansion at the high school and at Goodnight. Some conversation also there about a need for an expansion, maybe a weight room at Miller, because there seems to be a little bit of inequity there. And so we talked about those things. There was very little support for option A, which was just improvements for Mendez. Most of the conversation was about taking Mendez out and putting a new school there. And so little support for option C, which was Mendez addition and renovation, because the renovation was very expensive and looked like it wouldn't last long enough to justify the expense, is what the conversation was about. Little support for option E and F. Again, F was probably the most conservative option that we looked at, and it was just fixing some things that were in disrepair and bringing some things up to safety concerns. In the end, the potential projects to add were Goodnight Middle School Theater Arts Addition and San Marcos High School Performing Arts renovations. Those were not in the first set, and so Perkins and Will came back to us with some suggestions on that. We talked at length about an outdoor pool versus an auditorium. And we took some votes with regards to that. This is the vote on the Performing Arts Edition at the high school. You can see that all but one were in favor of the Performing Arts Edition to Goodnight and the high school. And then there was a conversation about an outdoor pool. Two people suggested, oh, we could do an outdoor pool, and everybody else said, when is swim season? And somebody said February, so the vote kind of went that direction because an indoor facility seemed like if we did this, we'd need to do it indoors. So we had that conversation. Then we used the online polling to also take another vote on whether or not the committee thought a K through 8 campus where Mendez is currently, or a K through 5 replacement campus, leaving off the 6th through 8th grade. So this, as we talked about that, there was some important clarifications because we sort of got off in the weeds. I don't know if y'all ever get off in the weeds, but sometimes we get off in the weeds. And we were wondering, you know, I think we went from talking about facilities things to talking about curriculum things, and we don't have any control over that, but we were concerned that what would it look like if Mendez became this campus where all of the dual language kids went to and those sort of things. And bottom line is that you know 657 kids in the dual language program currently, so there's not a campus large enough to house all those kids. So we had to go back and make some clarifications. And as we were doing this, we ended up taking 3 votes on the thing because there was a lot of confusion about it. I even had a conversation earlier today to discuss more that things for elementary students would stay the same, but perhaps the 6th through 8th campus at Mendez would provide a expansion or extension to the dual language program that currently stops before you get to the 6th grade. So after having some of that clarification from admin, from Dr. Cardona, we appreciate that. We took these votes, and the first vote before the discussion was an 8 to 12 vote to do a K through 5. And then we talked some more about it and said, well, here's some questions. And then we took another vote, and it was K5 kind of lost the vote that time. And so then we had even more conversations, and it got down to 2 votes for the K through 5 to 18 votes or 16 votes for the K through 8. So as we clarified it more and more, it seemed like our direction that we thought looked the best was to go with the K through 8 campus for Mendez Elementary. So then there was some conversation. I don't know, I might be getting out of order here, but I just want to let you know we were concerned. Does all this come through as one big bond? You know, because that's a large bond. We weren't sure if some of the athletic facilities needed to be separated out and those sort of things. So in the conversation, we discovered that we could do an option for the improvements in the campus at Mendez, the expansion to the high school, the renovations to some of the elementaries that need some attention, as well as all the safety upgrades and a digital marquee at all the campuses. We could do that all in one package. And then there was a lot of conversation about the athletic fields at the high school needing replacement of the turf because they're reaching their lifespan, the limit of their lifespan. And so as we talked about that, we were concerned, does that all go into one bond? And we discovered that it didn't have to go all into one bond. We could do Prop A, which was $147,000 for all of the buildings maintenance, bringing things up to speed, adding on to campuses, and do that separately from a Prop B and C, which would be separated out. Prop B would be the high school stadium, the football stadium would be a different proposition to replace the turf there, and then the natatorium would be its own proposition. The total $166,187,957. You know, I don't do that very often. I don't talk in numbers that large very often. I wish I did, but I don't, so I apologize. I didn't do that off very well. But you can see them broken out, and those would be the different propositions if this went to a bond. This was our suggestion, this was our understanding, and the committee, like I said, with some thorough discussion, everybody was pretty much on board with this idea, and we had a lot of help from Perkins and Will, and we had some discussion about the financial impact. And I'd like to invite you, sir, to come and describe these numbers to them, because I certainly don't talk about these things very often, so if you would introduce yourself.
Thank you. Again, for the record, Robert Tijerina with Tijerina Galvan and Lawrence, the school district's financial advisor. And the total amount of $166,200,000 is what all three propositions that we just rounded up from 160 and change, 187 and change, all the way to 200,000. That is expected to have a potential tax rate increase if this bond is called and passes of 4.26 cents. And that's assuming property value growth of about 5% for next fiscal year, 2024, and then an additional 2 more fiscal years of 5% property value growth. So currently you're at 9.1 billion property value. So from 22 to 23, your staff had stated that we had a property valuation increase of about 22%, a little over 22%. They know the numbers better than anybody, so they're projecting 3 years of 5% growth. That's pretty conservative, and they're feeling, and talking with the other local appraisal districts, that it may be right around there, maybe a little higher. So your current values are 9.1. We see an increase next year going to about 9.5 billion, and then in 25 to about 10 billion, 50 million, and then we'll pretty much plateau after fiscal year 2026. We'll hit 10 billion, 552 million, and at that time we show no future valuation growth. So again, the bond election to call, the property values increase on column M. We have column M, row 8, 4.26 pennies of an increase. Your existing tax rate can be found on column C, row 7, and it's currently at 26.92, column C, row 7. And if this bond election is called and it passes, we'll go from onto column M, row 8, an increase of 4.26 cents for a total INS tax rate going into fiscal year 24 of roughly 31.18 cents. And talk to your staff, and we all know that pretty much your valuation generates about, 1 cent generates about 900-some thousand, say about 920,000 at about 97% collection. So pretty much about $900,000 can bring down a penny from there. So instead of 4.26 cents, and talking with your staff, if there's any reserves in your excess collection in the account where after you make your debt payments, there's extra interest and sinking fund revenue set aside. And what the board has done and the district has done in the last few years is done cash defeasances. So if there's any excess cash there, you can use some of that cash to buy down that increase, say at 900,000. So instead of 4.2 cents, we're looking at 3.2. So again, it's early in the stages, but this is kind of what we're looking at. The values, 5% growth, conservative. And we know if the property values increase, the expected INS tax rate increase we're looking to see instead of 4.2 will be less. You have that seesaw effect. If the valuations come in lower, then that increase is going to be a little higher. So again, it's also going to be key. Your staff will be monitoring how much you have in that excess reserve fund account. And we're looking at an interest rate, maturity of about 25 years, and an interest rate, and this all can be found on column M, row 12 and 13, an interest rate of 4.52% going out 25 years. And we all know that permanent school fund, I know everybody's received emails saying that permanent school fund bond insurance, which costs school districts $1,500 to apply, and you receive the AAA status. You get that bump up. They've turned away and denied applications for 2 school districts, one of them being Austin Independent School District. They had a $2.2 billion bond election last November, and they're pretty much saying, you know, we want to save it for other school districts that don't have a AAA bond rating, which includes this district and other districts in Texas. So this bond election passes, we really won't know yet if we can receive the permanent school fund bond insurance. We'll apply for it. It's $1,500, and they could tell us you will receive it and you get your bond rating bumped up to AAA, or they could tell us it's filled, we're at capacity, we don't have any room. Then we can either wait till PSF becomes available, or we can go ahead and purchase private bond insurance, which is at an additional cost. It won't be $1,500, depending on how much we sell. It could be $50,000 to maybe $200,000 of bond insurance, but that can maybe boost up your bond rating. No, it's quite a bit of information. Any of the board members have questions? I can say your committee and your other consultants and your staff did a great job, fantastic. All we did was just add numbers to it, that was it. The hard work was done by your committee, your staff, and your architect firms, and so I applaud all of them. They did a great job, it's fantastic. I told other clients and say, wow. They did voting online on Zoom to determine what projects, so it was pretty interesting, really exciting to see. So any questions from the board?
Ms. Halsey?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Pastor Pig, and to the committee. This is great. It's super helpful. And I do have a couple of questions first for Mr. D'Arena. Why are the valuations going to cease increasing after 2026?
That's where the staff feel, well, anything beyond that, we're not too certain. We can continue the growth, maybe less than 5%, but we all know that, you know, there's some growth coming in. After 2026, again, we just flatlined it. We can add some valuation growth. Again, if the valuations go up, that tax rate's going to go down. So we know that there's an opportunity to, when the time to sell the bonds, we can look at maybe having some future projections added after fiscal year 2026.
So it's
But we
just
show- we
it's just sort
very
of too far
conservative.
out to project. It's not that you're forecasting some cataclysmic occurrence that would impact us adversely like that, right?
I'm sorry, say that again?
It's just too far out to really project accurately. It's not that you're forecasting something cataclysmic.
Right. It's we normally see 3 to 5 years of projections from issuers, whether it's a city, county, or school district. They'll get some information from the appraisal district. But I think Mike did a great job calling the appraisal district, and he knew right away the hesitation. Well, we really don't know exactly anything after this next year or anything further out. But just looking at the history, I mean, we know that the district has been hitting, except last year from 22 to 23, 22%. That was a big spike. But it's been averaging well above 5%, you know, the last several years if you average them together. So they felt more comfortable to stop it at 3.
Okay,
and
that
see
makes
what
sense.
happens there.
Okay, and then with the permanent school fund bond insurance, would that mean that we would be able to have a lower tax increase? Get that?
The interest rate with the
A lower
permanent school
interest rate.
fund bond insurance, you're able to go from your bond rating and have it increase from a AA to the AAA with a permanent school fund bond insurance, because you get that guarantee from the state saying that if whoever receives permanent school fund bond insurance, this district has PSF insurance on all your voted debt. So anybody that just recently received it from the November election, what it does, it bumps up. Say there's a district that has a A bond rating. They get the PSF for $1,500, and it bumps up their bond rating to a AAA. Say it's with Moody's. So they go from an A to a AAA because they have this insurance. So what that insurance does, it guarantees the bondholders, the people that are going to loan you the money, the investors, that if you ever run into an issue that you can't make your bond payments, the state's going to kick in and make those bond payments for you. So it's kind of like a co-signer.
Got
And
it.
so that means when you get that AAA, it does mean lower interest rates potentially in the market, Because if you trade with a AAA, with a cosigner, you look better than if you obtain a loan with a bond, with a A rating without a cosigner. And so the rate will be lower if you have that insurance versus if you don't have that
But that
insurance.
doesn't then increase our bond capacity and therefore lower that 4.26% at all?
It could lower that 4.52%. We ran it with PSF insurance. Assuming we get PSF insurance, we ran that in there. We won't know until we apply unless they come out and say anytime between now and the bond election or when it's time to sell, they say, hey, we are done. We need to reevaluate. I know right now they turned away 2 large school districts, again, Austin being one of them. I don't know who else, but a lot of the issuers that we talked to, they're saying or TA is saying, you won't know until you apply. So again, the lower the rate, the more capacity you have. The lower the rate, that means the tax rate increase is going to also be lower. The higher the interest rate, it's going to cost us a little more, which means the tax rate could be a little bit higher.
Okay, and then I have one final question, and I'm not sure if this is for you or for Mr. Doyle, but we know that the state of Texas is facing a historic overage, and I'm wondering if we see any funding coming from the state that could help offset any of these expenses, like security funding, any buildings and structure funding, any infrastructural funding that they're talking about?
I think it's way too early to tell in the biennium. I think as we move forward in the coming months, we'll have more clarity on that. But from my knowledge, it's still really kind of cloudy and too far off to tell.
So I was able to participate last week with TASA, with Kevin Brown and his group on a joint state executive committee. And they are looking, there are talks about the legislature addressing school safety. You know, we get a whole $9.72 right now per student. They've talked about increasing the basic allotment from $61.60, but every $100 increase in the basic allotment is adding about $700 million to the budget. So 1.4 over the biennium. That there's talk about looking at enrollment and addressing enrollment, and there's talk about property value, like massive property value.
But they're not talking about specific grants that they're going to make available for expenses such as the ones that we're talking about.
And
So we did apply for one of the grants, I think, Mr. Wozniak, and we got $400,000 for the bulletproof shield. So there's the bulletproof film on the windows, which was enough to cover maybe the front of this building.
Okay, and then I have one final question, and maybe this is best for Pastor Pig. But I was just wondering about the rationale of the committee in breaking it up into 3 propositions and why that seemed like it might be most effective.
Well, some of it was out of our hands. Some of it was when you have an athletic program, it has to be broken up into a separate bond. I wasn't.
So the turf field on the
Fully
football
understand.
field, because it seats more than 1,000, anything seating more than 1,000 have to be its separate proposition by law.
And there's a separate item. If it's called a recreation center, they're also wanting that separated out. It's a new law that you have to break those out now.
So the law is dictating the 3 different ones, or do we have any wiggle room there?
Yes, no, that is broken out per the law. So any maintenance or let's say you want to do a stadium, that over 1,000 seats, it has to be its own separate proposition. And so that's just a new one. It came out, a year and a half ago
Right.
or so?
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Dr. Salmi?
yeah, so, sorry I'm late. The presentation that you've presented to us and made available to us, this is maybe not directly at you, but I just wanted we were talking about potential changes to the legal code that the legislature may be making. Those would be decided this year, not go into effect for the May 2023 election, but all of the work that's gone into preparing for this bond in this short period of time could still be carried over into a May 2024 election. Just want to be clear, is that all accurate and true?
To my understanding, it is.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Trustee Giovanni?
Yes, this is from Mr. Teixeira. Back on the tax and all that good stuff, and how we rate with AAA, is it AAA?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We have, we've been very diligent about doing the deficiencies over the, I don't know how many years. But, so that doesn't have anything to do with how we could get a better rating, or?
The defeasance will help, and that minimizes the dialogue for the bond election for this coming May, particularly this May. So the defeasance that the board approved last August, we're going to defease that here sometime in March or April. So you'll be paying off debt roughly 5.6 million and save about 1.3 million, more or less. So that defeasance will help, and it allows the capacity to do the bond election. So it allows those extra pennies that you're paying off because of the defeasance, and you can fill them in with new debt. And this isn't the first defeasance, you're right. The board has done several defeasances over the years and saved several $1 million for the taxpayers here by doing those defeasances. And you strategize, and this past summer, to keep the pennies in order to pay off debt. So when those pennies come in, the funds aren't staying with the district and gathering up and building up a reserve. They're coming in, and you're paying off debt, roughly 5.7 million. So it does help you whenever you go out and have the rating due diligence calls that we have once a year. They'll look at your debt, and they'll see, they know the defeasances, that when the board approved them, when you're paying them off, and they'll do a 5 to 10 year look back and say, okay, the district was here, and over the last few years you paid off this. So those actions that the board have taken does help and put stress on increasing your bond rating. We're 2 steps away from a AAA by ourselves, the district. Not me, but the district is just 2 steps away. We all know that getting that upgrade from the bond rating companies, they make you jump through a lot of hoops, hurdles, obstacles to get it. They want to see a constant increase of either fund balance increasing, enrollment plays a factor, property values are a factor, expenses, annual expenses, are they under control, are they declining, are they constantly increasing along with the revenues? You know, that you're just continuing to spend, or are they capped out or dropping? So they'll look at all those factors to determine, does the district, is there pressure to boost up their bond rating? And we all know the bond rating is kind of like a credit score. So there is pressure of what you did in the summer and what you've done in the past for the rating agencies to say, hey, look, hopefully in the next couple of years, we need to bump up their bond rating. And eventually, if you continue property valuation growth, enrollment increases and continues to increase, and you see your valuation also increasing. And not only, and these are things they look at, the valuations, they see, okay, they ask Mike and Denise, is this all apartments or is this subdivisions? What's being developed there? If they're subdivisions, well, they ought to see some increase in enrollment also, kids coming into the school district. So these are great indicators to tell them that the district is growing. So there needs to be pressure there, more money coming in for the school district by the local tax rate levy, and more money from the state. When you have the enrollment increasing, you get more funds from them. So there is that opportunity to where down the road in a few years, hopefully you don't need to apply for PSF. You'll be at that AAA bond rating. But the closest, Austin, and I believe Northside or Alamo Heights are the other 2 school districts, or the other school districts around San Marcos that have that AAA bond rating. They don't give that out, very often. There's not a lot of school districts in Texas that have that standalone AAA.
How can, I guess my question is now to our superintendent, can we work on some language to get this bond, to put this kind of information so that the public knows what we have done in the past, so to get us to this point. We're not just out there trying to.
Sure. Can I speak to that? We, as a committee,
absolutely.
we
I
had
thought-
conversations about this.
Yes.
We asked, what's this gonna cost me on my mortgage? What's this gonna do to
That's what-
to my tax payments on the monthly? And so, a $500,000 home was about $20, I think it was?
Yeah.
$20 a month if you own a $500,000 home in terms of tax burden for the residents. And so we talked about that. But we also were informed, as you've been tonight, that of what we saw, that the district, in paying off those debts is just as diligently as possible, has kept that tax rate at 26 cents. And so now we're talking about moving it to 31 cents. And so there was a good understanding in the committee, and I think it was, I agree with you. I think we all talked about how it would be nice if we communicated that to the citizens of San Marcos to say this is, because I went home and figured out that, it cost me $7 or $8 a month more based on my current situation, right? And I think everybody ought to know, here's a formula. You can figure out what it's going to cost you. Are our kids worth that? Is investing in the school district worth that? And so I agree, and those conversations were had, and the numbers that he just presented were extremely helpful in doing so, and I think the citizens of San Marcos probably would appreciate that. So that's all.
Yeah, I think that Margie brings up a really good point, and it is related to a point that I want to make, which is that we are moving very fast to try to bring a bond to an election where we are also going to try to bring a recapture vote and have 3 single-member districts running. So I'm very concerned about the rate at which we're trying to bring this to the citizens of San Marcos. I think in the past, when we have been successful, we have spent more time investing upfront to get input from our community in meetings that didn't happen every day, every week, on the same day over the course of about a month. They were spaced out more so that more people were able to participate. I think we had longer time for people to consider the options that they were given and present those, come up with a decision about what they were being given. And I think we as a board need to consider that we don't necessarily need to rush into this bond this year. And that's a point that I'm really trying to make to my colleagues and to you on the committee. We appreciate your effort. This is a really important thing to do. I think we need to put really concerted effort into thinking about it, into community outreach before we try to convince the voters to vote for this and to vote for recapture in May, because we are also considering that on our ballot. So that's just my 2 cents on that. I think this is too important to rush into.
Mr. Shanks, do you have anything? Trustee Mejia?
I have a question. I'd like a little more clarification. Mendez, we're talking about, this is for you. Y'all came to the agreement that we would build a new school and replace
Yes,
Mendez?
we looked at a renovation, a serious renovation. It happened that it rained the week after we were there, and the nurses' station filled with water, and they had to move the nurse out. And so it was sort of a exclamation point on this thing has problems, and so we
I
talked about
thought
it.
that's what I understood,
Uh-huh,
but
so
I
we
wanted
talked-
to make
yeah.
sure that was, because I read through the 117
Sure.
slides twice,
Sure.
but it never really, I didn't get that clear impression.
I think it says, maybe I can go back to the slide if you want to see. It says replacement campus there, and so that's what we talked about, a renovation or a replacement campus. There were some plans from Perkins and Will that did a renovation with the 6 through 8 wing, and then there were some, there was sort of every iteration you can imagine. You saw all those slides, and we talked about all those things. And as a committee, it just seemed if we're going to spend that amount of money on the repair of that building, that maybe we ought to go ahead and just build a new one. That's what we talked about.
Thank you for that clarification.
Trustee Arredondo?
I'd also like to comment that I agree with Dr. Salmi. I'm not sure people are feeling the pinch right now, and I have concerns with I really want this bond to pass, and I have concerns with doing that at this point in time when there's a lot of uncertainty as where we're going with our economy right now. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Trustee Halsey.
Dr. Cardona, could you please explain the academic vision around the K through 8 campus and sort of how that will work logistically for students and what the benefit is, and also where those students will go while that school is being demolished and renovated and rebuilt, please?
I'll start from where the kids are right now. So we would build on site so the kids wouldn't be disrupted while they're on site. The property is big enough, and so we've been in conversations with the city because they're trying to address some bigger flooding issues in the neighborhood. So I think there's a potential for the city and the district to get together and work on this project with them and do some really cool stuff for that community. So you would build on the same site and then transition. So the idea really is around the 6 through 8. We're trying to figure out what to do with our dual language kids. So right now, academically speaking, when we have one group at Goodnight who are the first dual language group, if you remember from DZ, they're really only getting serviced in dual language through Spanish 1 and Spanish 2. And so we were trying to look as a group around addressing middle school growth with both Miller and Goodnight while supporting the dual language program. Ideally, your 6 through 8 kids they would transition. So I'm just using this hypothetically. So your 6th graders from both Goodnight and Miller who want to commit to the dual language program, and it is opt-in. Some families will choose not to. That's why we settle on a 240 number. They would go to their home campuses. So that would create some logistics issues, but we've seen it done where you bus kids, from one campus to the other. They would go to their home campus, take their elective classes, and then they would transition to Mendez for the dual language. So they would get dual language in English, math, science, social studies, Spanish 1, Spanish 2, AP Spanish language. Their core content area on one campus.
What would they get at their home campus? Sorry.
Spanish 1 and Spanish 2.
Electives.
They're
Any other electives?
Yeah, they
Athletics,
would be.
So they would do
yes.
athletics and any
Yeah.
fine arts at
Correct.
their home campus?
Correct.
But then they would, so the 6 through 8 at Mendez would not have the fine arts programs and the athletics programs?
Mendez K-5 would still have their
Right.
same programs.
Right.
We're just talking about academic, a GT program.
Uh-huh.
Well, dual language is a GT program, but just specifically academic programming
At the 6 through 8?
at the 6 through 8
Okay.
in a separate configuration, I think is what they showed. I don't know, do you have that up there?
So would that mean that we would both be able to expand the dual language services that the district is offering and alleviate some of the capacity issues at Miller and Goodnight?
I think the K-8's built to about 900 and there's 550 students at Mendez. 530 at Mendez? Yes.
Increase your capacity at elementary school to 660 and add 240 kids for 6 through 8.
So it wouldn't really, I mean, if the students are then going back and forth between Mendez and Goodnight and Miller, it wouldn't really alleviate the capacity issues at those schools because we'd still have to be able to
It would alleviate facility usage space.
during different points of the day.
Correct.
But it wouldn't really add a bunch of capacity.
No, you would not.
Okay, and then with the high school, Pastor Peg referenced the the 9th grade wing. Can you talk about sort of the vision, the academic vision for the high school changes and what that would entail and why?
So the high school went from an initial potential 9th grade wing, and then Perkins and Wills dumped water on my parade and all of our parade because we didn't realize there comes requirements from the state. If you say it's a 9th grade center, you would have to build a complete library, cafeteria, separate administrative, so that didn't make sense. So then the community started focusing in on additional classroom spaces, adding, addressing the front of the building. Potentially you could add on to that front and fix some safety issues, the drop-off area there in the front. And then fine arts got brought up because as we're growing our mariachi and our music program, when the school was built, they didn't have a separate facility. So I think they began, like I wasn't a part of that. This was completely driven by the community of looking at fine arts and changing the layout of that to address the programs that we now have that we didn't have in 2008. As we put, strings in the 5th grade, we have guitar classes being put at the middle school, so we're starting to grow these programs, so they needed a space potentially in the future.
So from a really simplistic boiled down elevator sort of spin, Proposition A would be the academic renovations and the equity renovations that make the fine arts in the various secondary schools give them more capacity and more equitable, and also the athletic and other extracurricular spaces at those secondary campuses, and build a new Mendez K-8 campus that would also increase the dual language capacity. And then Proposition B would be for the returfing of the high school, just the football field or other fields at the high school?
Just the
stadium.
football
Just-
stadium.
Just the one that has over 1,000 seats. So just the high school stadium.
Yeah, so baseball and the.
Okay, so
practice
the Prop B is solely the football field.
Yes.
Can I go through a little more detail?
Yeah.
Just what's included in Prop A. I think we kind of skimmed over that, and I know that you have the document, but it's nice
Yeah.
to hear it sometimes. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of what's happening at each campus. So at Bonham, because it's a safety issue, and it's in Prop A, we're going to extend the drop-off area. And as you all know, if you drive down Highway 123, at what time, you're not going to get through safely, right? So we're extending that out. And at every campus, there's technology and technology and security upgrades at every campus. So I'm not going to reiterate that every single time. In this, as well, is you have a bunch of buses that are coming out, or they're getting old, they're not able to be used, so they need to replace some buses. They're about $900,000 worth. I talked about the IT infrastructure, replacing some servers and those types of things for security, because you're adding cameras, you're adding things, so they need to be able to upgrade the systems to make sure that that's covered. At Bowie, we have quite a bit of work from the site standpoint. As you know, your soils are moving quite a bit. Your asphalt's starting to heave and sink, so you have to come in and kind of patch that, and then you'll seal coat it so water can't get underneath the soils. There at Crockett, you have the same thing. It's the site issues. You need to come in and reseal everything, patch those before they get worse. The longer you wait, the worse it's going to be, and then you're going to have to replace large chunks of, instead of just patching and repairing. So those are added costs. Your maintenance crew knows these campuses so well. Their forethought on this has been pretty amazing to watch, honestly. So they're thinking about those things. They're going, I only have to pay this much now. I'd have to pay twice if I wait 3 more years, right? So at Crockett, the same thing with some limited mechanical units that are being replaced. Remember that R22 mechanical, that R22 Freon is not made anymore. So you have to hold on to whatever you have so you can repair your systems. If you don't hold on to it, then you're replacing entire units. And that could take forever, right? Because nobody's making those type of units anymore. Everybody's trying to replace the old R22 systems, and now you're on a waiting list. So if a unit goes down, it could be 3 months, I'm hypothetical, 3 months before that unit can come back on. So now you have 3-4 classrooms that don't have AC at that time. So again, forethought from your maintenance guys going, these are the units at these campuses that we need to replace because they're at the end of life, or they're just having to fix them all the time. So we're taking care of those items when you see that priority 1 R22 number. At De Zavala, adding the additional parking there and replacing or upgrading, refurbishing the chiller. We're not having to replace it, we're just refurbishing it and replacing some of those R22 units. At Hernandez, for safety and security, we've got to redo that front admin area. It's just not where it needs to be to meet the new security issues and concerns. That and those restrooms I mean, if you've ever walked in there, you know what I'm talking about. They need to be just renovated, new fixtures, new toilet partitions, those types of things. Mendez, none of the priority one, because in both of the options that the community selected, they're saying that it'd be a replacement. We, like he said, we did look at trying to fully renovate and do additions to increase capacity for both elementary and high school, but the price difference, it was negligible. And then you're having to come back and replace it in a few years anyway, because you're almost at the end of life for that building, right? It was built in the 60s. You're coming up on 50 years pretty quickly. At Travis Elementary School, again, site issues, we've got to get on top of that so you're not causing, not having to do major repairs in the future. At Goodnight, electrical upgrades, mechanical, which is the R22, PA systems for safety and security, so everything's tied into one system. We do have some front items that need to be addressed with the vestibules. The band hall addition that he had talked about, and and then also the theater arts, because they don't have some of the spaces that Miller has from a fine art standpoint, that Miller got in the last renovation. Miller, we're doing some panel upgrades in a couple of those units that didn't get addressed. Doing the athletic additions, because it's an intermediate school. It was an intermediate school. That's what they're working out of right now with athletics. We want to bring up that equity across the middle school levels, so we're making that equal between the two campuses. And then at San Marcos, like Dr. Cardona said, fixing the site circulation in front, separating out student parking versus staff parking, trying to get that separated out so people aren't driving through parking lots to pick their kiddos up, because that front circle is pretty small. Fixing a lot of the drainage. You have some retention walls back in the stadium area that are starting to heave and start to fall because the clay's expanding, contracting. Around the site, because it's a relatively flat site, you need to come in and fix some of that erosion. And it's just not easy to do when you have a suspended slab. So we're going to have to come in and replace some panels and those types of things that keep the dirt out from underneath the building. Talked about the high school addition. To give you that flexibility right now, you're looking at, yes, you have capacity for 2,700 students, but the way you're having to use it because of some of the new programs the state's making you use, like 24.
House Bill 4545, our favorite.
So your capacity is almost acting as 2,500 students. And so just giving the flexibility, you know they're full, you know you're hearing, I need more space, and that's a big reason why. So we're going to give them that flexibility to act as a 2,700 student capacity. When you have this many kids in the fine arts, it wasn't built around 2,700 kids. It was built around 2,200 kids. And that's where some of these programs are, and we heard it from multiple community members saying, we have this many kids now, we have these programs, we don't have anywhere to put them. They're shoving them in small rooms, they're kind of playing close together, so that became a priority for the community. So, and then at Lamar, we have our safety and security items that we need to address as well. So sorry for not clarifying that earlier. I should have walked y'all through that a little bit. So in that Prop A, that 147, we're including inflation for the next year, right? So you're looking at that, it's gonna, if you went for a bond, say in May, you don't start construction for almost a year. So we're including inflation, we're including those types of things inside of this number, so to cover the unknowns, right? You're looking, depending on who you're talking to, or what contractor you're talking to, you're looking between, I think it's 7 and 12% on inflation a year. So we're conservative, we're only at 8%, we feel comfortable right now. We're seeing the market kind of level out on materials. So, I mean, level out as in 8%, I can handle that, right? We were seeing some crazy stuff. But labor's really the hardest part right now. Labor, that's where a lot of your costs are gonna be, because the rest of Austin and Central Texas is busy. You see what's going on. They just passed a $2.2 billion bond in Austin ISD. They're gonna move fast. They're gonna try to get all that work done within the next 5 years. So you see those subcontractors that your general contractors are trying to pick up. They're out there, they're bringing in subs from other places, so you're gonna pay a little bit more. We're seeing that still increasing, but they're thinking like in the next 6 months, that should balance out just with our inflation. So we feel comfortable with the 8% that we're carrying there. Now, if we delay it, we just need to add 8% until we decide when we want to move. Let's see. For Prop B, we talked about the field turf replacement at the stadium. We're still, in Prop A, still have that turf replacement at baseball, softball, and practice field. That's in Prop A. Because of the legalese, we have to break out the maintenance at the stadium. So that's the maintenance for the replacement. And as Coach had said, in the long term, it saves you money. You're not having to replace this. You only have to replace it every 10 years. You're able to use it all day long with the kids. You're not having to protect your grass all the time. So you're able to get much more use out of it. Your maintenance goes way down. They're not having to go out there and mow. You're in water, especially right now. Water is super important. So we're reducing a lot of those costs by having the turf. And you already have the turf out there. You have the infrastructure for drainage. You have all those out there already. So all you're doing is taking the carpet off and putting new carpet on. And then for Prop C, because it's a recreational activity center, that was its own separate prop as well for Prop C. Did I say that? So sorry for me to.
It's okay. Can I ask a question?
I have a couple questions, if you don't mind, Dr. Salmi. This is for Mr. Tijerina. Mr. Tijerina, what is the amount if, say, for instance, the board were to consider a no tax rate increase proposition?
That's a good question. We ran a scenario a few weeks ago where I believe, and I have that here. I have it right here. We were looking at about $96 million would be no INS tax rate increase.
So was that information, Coleman, staff, whoever would like to answer this, was that presented to the committee as like this, you could bring this to the board, you could take this to the voters, if you fit as much as you could into this pot of money, we could take a no tax rate bond proposition?
Yes, we talked, thank you. We talked about that quite a bit. That was where we came up with option A, B, C, D, E, F, E and F, right? So to have that discussion, and I think the community saw the need. They're going, we got to get ahead of the R22 replacements. We don't want to have to replace entire asphalt, for entire parking lots. And really, like he said, came down to the buildings. If we're going to spend this much money on doing an addition and a facelift on Mendez, why aren't we just doing it so we don't have to mess with it for another 50 years, right?
Thank you. So, because I never delete my emails, and if now someone wants to FOIA me, they can, I was looking at information from then our CFO, Karen Griffith, from our 2017 bond process, which interestingly enough, I see so many committee members out there who were a part of that process, whether they were a community appointee by this board or on staff at the time of the ISD. And from what I can find in those emails, a process started in very late fall. I think the first meeting was November 15th. And then by that following February, we brought it to the board and took it to the voters. So, 4 months, several weeks, is that a significant time differential? I think that's up for debate. But based on what I can see from the 2017 bond election, we impaneled a committee to meet 4 or 5 times and make a recommendation, which is what happened in this process. And the thing that I find most interesting is a committee bring forward a proposal that is asking the voters to increase their taxes. Because very easily, the committee could have said, we're going to take the $96 million amount, we're going to take it to the board, that's an easy ask, we've done that before, and that's how I would have done it, right? That just makes sense to me. But there's a reason why we appointed the committee members that we did, that we, endeavored to have a diverse input from the community. Each board member got to appoint 3 appointees, the staff got to appoint 9. And so the takeaway that I get is this committee of folks who represent all walks of life in San Marcos CISD believe that this is important enough to take it to the voters. They believe it's important enough to ask taxpayers to increase their taxes, whether you're 65 years old and a retired ISD employee, or you own a small business, or you're a realtor and you're selling homes in this community. So for me, that's how I look at this proposal, is that there's enough belief and confidence in the process and the people in place to take this to the voters and ask them to increase their taxes. And the last thing that just like really sticks with me is I don't see anything being proposed that I haven't heard about in the last 7 years of serving on this school board. Whether it's the needs at Miller, the dire needs at now Mendez Elementary. Since we've opened Bonham, we've known that that entryway is dangerous with cars queuing up on 123. I can't imagine dropping off a preschooler there, picking them up every day. Nothing that has been presented shocks me, right? We've talked about an auditorium. We talked about an auditorium 2 superintendents ago, and it just never materialized into a conversation. And so, you know, being here almost a decade now, these are all needs that have existed in the school district since I was elected in 2015, and I think waiting a year, 2 years doesn't change that need. If anything, it only gets worse. So we can continue having these conversations. We can continue asking the committee for additional input to take this to the community. But I was under the assumption that that is what these appointees were for, was to get that community input. And so I guess for me, like I said, the biggest takeaway that I have is a diverse cross-section of our neighbors said, you know, we believe in this enough to ask for a tax rate increase. We believe this enough to not ask for more time. And as someone who sat up here and seen these ideas or these proposals come forward numerous times, with the board debating, you know, at one point in time, the board voted to spend millions of dollars out of fund balance to address the inequalities at Miller, and that was a very contentious issue. It got, there was a very energized conversation, and rightly so, because we are doing a disservice to the students at Miller for not providing adequate and equal facilities that are at the other middle school in the ISD. So that's where I am, and you know, I encourage continued dialogue and conversation. And just as like a FYI, we aren't agendized this evening to call for a bond. It's my understanding, if I'm mistaken, Dr. Cardona, please correct me, that this would be a conversation for our February 13th meeting. And Pastor Pig, I don't know if you can clarify, is there interest from the group meeting again? Or I'd kind of heard conversation, you might try and get the committee together an additional time before the 13th, or was I mistaken?
No, we had no discussion about
Okay.
meeting again. We,
Okay.
I think we concluded our conversations for the most part.
Okay.
Mr. Andando, I have a clarifying
Yeah,
question.
Dr. Salmi.
Thank you. Our current capacity at the high school, so we are expanding the high school to have a capacity of 2,700 students. What is our current capacity at the high school? The proposal is to.
So, design capacity is 2,700 students. The way you're using it right now.
Right, okay.
Right, 2,500, so we're bringing it back to the 2,700 student
Okay.
based on the curriculum.
So we're not adding capacity at
Correct.
the high school?
And, yeah, and that gets you
okay.
out to, yes, and it increases your fine arts opportunities. So-
Understood. And I want to just say I absolutely support, I appreciate that the community supports this. I think that that's really important and valuable. I want us to bring the voters something that can pass. And so I think this is something that is really, really valuable, that we have so much community support behind this. And I think we need to just make sure we are addressing the issues that are most pressing to our district. And from my memory of our meetings with the demographers, capacity is one of those issues that is most pressing on us, capacity at the high school. And so I do have concerns that the bond we are talking about presenting doesn't directly address that capacity concern. And it seems to for the middle schools, right? We're saying we're increasing middle school capacity by 250 students. So that'll be, and I am very interested in the method to do it, like to have a focus on our dual language campuses, being able to, elementary campuses, being able to continue into middle school. I think that's incredibly valuable and a really good way to make use of the resources we already have at our existing campuses. I think that's wonderful. I have concerns about not increasing the capacity at our high school, given the demographer reports that we've been getting, that capacity is insufficient for our intended growth for the next 10 years.
But we did add the capacity for the fine arts, so that does increase capacity.
Okay.
One of the conversations, specifics of the conversation that we had with regards to capacity at the high school was that the Phoenix program, for instance, is not strictly a campus within a campus
Yes.
currently. And so this would give us the ability to make that a campus within a campus.
Because it would be given its own facilities, is that what you're
Well,
saying?
it would be given its own space within the facility
Okay.
instead of repurposed space that was not intended for it in the first place.
I see.
So those kinds of shifts
Uh-huh.
in where that student population is
Yeah.
what we were led to understand that would, it wouldn't technically increase the
Uh-huh.
capacity, but currently we were using it like 83%,
Uh-huh.
right? And I don't know if you've ever been in a space that was 83% used, but it's rough, and so
Yeah,
people
yes,
start peeling off at 80%. It's just
Yeah.
something we've learned, and so he was telling us about that. I don't know if I was buying time with that commentary or what.
That's
but
okay,
there
it
you
was
go.
important information, and I appreciate you giving it to us. Thank you.
So I was pulling up the demographics report when we were doing the comparison. I don't know if I can change it out, but just to kind of give you an idea, in 2026, you're at 2,663 students at the high school. You do have a bump at 2024 up to 2,707, but then it dips back down according to the demographer. So you're really not hitting like 2,782 kids until 2029 there. So again, when you're at 2,600, 2,700, you're going to feel very crowded. And I think that's where we were saying the way that the space is being used, it's going to give you more freedom on the fine arts and the classroom additions, so they're not feeling so crowded. We're not having, and they're already being flexible. They're being efficient with their space. Your average utilization of classrooms is much higher than we see typically anywhere else. Usually you're in that 70-ish range, and I think we're at 82%, 87%. So they're being smart about how they're using the building. They just need that flexibility right now to get through the next 5-6 years.
Any other questions,
So
comments?
capacity
Halsey?
would be reached
Oh,
in
sorry.
2029 is what the take-home message there was.
I'm gonna go to Ann.
Yeah, I would say 2027. 2027, I wish I could show you.
My question is a little bit to
Yeah,
the
Ms.
side, but
Halsey.
it's relevant. Dr. Cardona, do you think it would be possible to have you and Mr. Tiarina put together a PowerPoint, some sort of presentation for our city council so that they can understand how the decisions that they're making affect our property values, our enrollment, and I was struck by the comment about when we're determining city planning and for housing and whether or not we're putting in apartments or we're putting in subdivisions and how those things factor into our bond rating, which then affects what we're able to do within the school in terms of these capacity questions and in terms of where we put new schools and how we put those in. And I just have a feeling that not very many people in City Hall understand the ramifications of their decisions on the decisions that then we are faced with making. So if there's a way that we could get onto that agenda and make that presentation, I think it would be very helpful. Probably not, change anything tomorrow, but certainly maybe going down the road.
We've had this same discussion. I've had this as a board member on Greater San Marcos Partnership. I've had this specific discussion with them as they're bringing in businesses, but not advocating for housing. And like, that's great, we're bringing in a business, but we need 1,000 more kids because we're paying $5 million back to to the state because we're property wealthy. And we've had this conversation with Stephanie Reyes, Lori Moyer, Chase Stapp, and the other assistant city manager just last week about the new Second City Center and several other things. We've had meetings with them about, like, you really need to think through these because you're negatively affecting the district in some cases as to where our resources are going, and we're not being included in the discussion, and we're making decisions. We have, just so the public knows, the city has our demographer report, they have our geocoding, so we have given them all the things as they're keep approving these projects. We're like, somebody has to stop and work with us to put some common sense into this.
Yeah, no, I know. I appreciate all the effort the staff has been making, which I do appreciate. I just think it would be great to get in front of, on the city council agenda, because I think it also is something that the people who are on the P&Z need to be keeping in mind, and I'm not sure that they are. So I think that, the more people we can educate on this in our community, the better.
Sure.
I think
Thank you.
Trustee Mejia had a question.
So can y'all hear me? Okay. I am just gonna follow up on Trustee Halsey's and Trustee Miguel Redondo's comment. So the more that we educate people on this, the better. And then also, in regards to Trustee Arredondo's comment, this committee is already doing the work. And we appointed community leaders, district alumni, retirees, university faculty, just very, very involved community leaders. And I was there present for a majority of those meetings, and I saw them collaborate together and ask very, very wonderful questions that I didn't even know that could affect every single option, proposition. And so I just want to inform my colleagues here that they've done the work, and I just don't understand why y'all want this to be extended when they came here to present to us. So the work is done, and sometimes it's tough trusting the community, but they're out there. They know the district.
Mr. Hernandez?
Yeah,
Sure.
Dr.
I
Solomon.
just want to say I absolutely trust the work that was done by this committee. I support it. I appreciate it. I think it was a valiant effort. My concern is in our ability to follow through with it and get the voters to vote for this. And so that's my concern, much more than the plan that was presented, because I think that there's a lot going on right now that is beyond the control of all the people that were on this committee that may make it hard for this to pass in the May 2023 election. So I absolutely support the work that you did. I think you brought really innovative ideas that I hadn't considered and I think are very valuable for us to consider. My other concern is the capacity and the fact that we're saying we're going to spend this money now and in less than 10 years we're still going to reach capacity at the high school. And that's a concern I have because that's what people will say when we bring this to the electorate. And I think we have to look at this strategically as why are people going to not vote for it? Well, if they look at these numbers and they say, well, in 10 years, we're already going to be over capacity at the high school. Why would I vote for that now? And so I want to set us up for an election on a bond where we can address all of these issues. I think all of them are extremely important. And I think the strategies that are presented are really innovative and interesting. But the capacity is the main focus that I think we all sort of started on, or at least I did. So that's my concern. It is absolutely not the committee members and what they brought to us. I appreciate all of your effort.
So I believe Trustee Mejia has another comment, but before I go to Trustee Mejia, I just want to remind everyone that we are agendized to discuss this evening. I know personally, and if you've watched me over the years, you know that I could go all night, but I don't think that's what tonight is for. Obviously, I think during agenda preparation, we're going to bring this up for possible discussion and action then. So I'll let Trustee Mejia go, and if there's any other board members who haven't spoken or need to ask any more questions of the committee or the attorney or the architects or anything like that, I would encourage you to do that now, and we can reserve the discussion and deliberation about a proposed bond for the 13th. Okay, cool.
I just want to remind my colleagues that we appointed committee members that are involved with the community. So the community already is aware that we are discussing this. Like I said, I don't think that we should extend this. They came up with a presentation, a proposal for us, and we should proceed. But that's my opinion.
Okay, so any other questions from anyone of the architects, attorneys, committee members? Thank you so much for the folks who joined us this evening and who took out several evenings of your time over the past several weeks to have a very robust and intentional conversation. And much like the post office, through rain, sleet, snow, you continued to meet last week, so I know I appreciate that and I thank you. Without any other questions or comments, I think we can move on to item number 7, agenda preparation.
All right, I just also want to thank the community members. If y'all can stand up so the board members can see some of y'all, because nobody asked them to come, they just showed up. And just to echo some of the sentiments, we've had the same conversation, Pastor Pigs, on my faith-based community meeting. So we have talked to 20 to 25 ministers about a potential board calling a bond. So they are very well aware of this also. And I've asked for their support if the board chooses to do that or not. They're going to support us regardless. So,
And the Education Foundation, it came up at the Education Foundation meeting.
Education Foundation. And so appreciate each of y'all giving me people to talk to in different areas. Go ahead to the agenda item. We will have our, as part of our process that we mentioned last month, item 5 is just a public hearing as we look at the potential for exploring District of Innovation. That will be led by, who's going to be leading that? There you go. Mr. Fernandez has been given that task.
The survey results will be?
We have survey results.
Yes. It's open until February 25th, but I'll provide you with what has been, I just looked, we have 78 responses.
Okay.
We'll send
There's a
out
survey people should take.
We will be recognizing some students. Again, we have many students being recognized for many great things, and just so the public that's watching on YouTube, all 3 of them besides Ms. Cantu, you know, a lot of these student recognitions are students that are being recognized in areas that we don't gain credit for them in accountability. But as a board, we all value a well-rounded child and what we are providing them. Item 7, we'll have a closed session as authorized by section 551.076 and 551.074 of the Texas Government Code. We'll have item A, a mid-year update for duties and responsibilities of Miller and Goodnight Middle School principals. If you remember last year, we had the same discussion about the same time as part of the TEA, so this is just because they are in need of improvement. We'll have a follow-up discussion as we move forward. We will have item B, discussion regarding formative mid-year evaluation of superintendent of schools, and I will have a presentation in closed session for y'all that some information has been asked for. And then item C, discussion regarding school safety. Mr. Wozniak will be coming back with some school safety updates and some follow-up on some things we talked about previously regarding our schools. There's no action from those, as they're just part of the process. Item 8, reports and information items. Mr. Sanders and the academic team will be presenting the TAPER District Annual Report. So thinking forward as we're projecting, this is going to move later next year because with the new accountability system, we will not be getting accountability scores next year till September, which is interesting. But this will probably move down to next April, probably, I would venture to see.
Is that going to be yearly?
Well, the Commissioner of Education's resetting the A through F system, and because they're resetting it, they've already said they're not getting scores back until much later this next year. So we don't know if that's gonna become permanent, but for the foreseeable future, it will be, yes, ma'am. Item 8B, we'll have an update by the redistricting committee on single-member redistricting plan. Item C, a quarterly investment report and quarterly financial report by Mr. Doyle. Item 9, approval of consent agenda items, the approval of minutes for regular scheduled board meeting on January 9th, 2023, and special board meeting on February 6th, 2023. Under item 10A, academics, we'll be presenting the approval of innovative courses for the 2023 school year. And then I need to add, I apologize, didn't account for the bad weather day, but under academics, we do need to submit a waiver for the 3 days. The governor did declare a disaster for Hayes County, and so TEA opened a waiver window so that we would not be penalized for the 3 days. But in addition to that, if you remember, we need the board to pass a resolution so that we can pay for the hourly employees as they were off, and so we'll have that resolution for y'all. And then we, on February 14th, will upload that documentation to TEA so they can not penalize us. Item 10B, human resources. It's just a yearly thing. Consider approval of our early notification of retirement resignation incentive for professional, paraprofessional, and auxiliary employees. And I think on average, we've been about anywhere from 20 to 28 people, but it is becoming more and more towards the 28 as people are exiting. Item 10C, elections. Item 1, consider contract with Hayes County for the purpose of election services. Item 2, consider contract with Caldwell County for the purpose of election services. Item 3, consider contract with Guadalupe County for the purpose of election services. Item 4, it's an election year. Consider and contract resolution to participate in joint election with Hayes County to be held on May 6, 2023. Item 5, consider contract and resolution to participate in joint election for Caldwell County to be held on May 6, 2023. And item 6, consider an order calling an election to be held on May 6, 2023 for the purpose of electing 3 trustees. Of course, that could all change if people run opposed, so this could change. Item 7, consider and possible action to approve an order calling an election to authorize the purchase of attendance as provided by Chapter 49 to be held on May 6th. This is the item that Dr. Salmi referred to earlier as recapture and us having to address that. And item 8, consider an order calling a bond election to be held on May 6, 2023. And then item D really is consider approval of budget amendments. Currently, we have 2. They are fairly significant. One is to, let's see if I get this right. I'll take the bad news for this one. That way your team doesn't have to take it. One is to, Mr. Duval, we've spoke so highly of maintenance. One is a significant budget expenditure to replace a water heater, basically, boiler at the high school. And it's a 6-digit expenditure, but the kids need hot water for our programs and athletics and other areas. And then the second item is for transportation, is for security cameras, additional security cameras on some of the buses to be replaced.
Thank you, Dr. Cardona. Are there any requests from my colleagues to add any items to the February 13th meeting? Yes?
I
Ms.
have a
Halsey?
couple, please. My first question is actually about the calendar. So I understand that the District of Innovation, if we go forward with that, will change the academic calendar for the year, but I've already received questions about when that calendar is going to be published, because usually we have it out by this point. Mr. Fernandez has done a terrific job over the last few years of getting that out early to the community. So what are we looking at in terms of when we will be able to finalize that calendar?
So our goal is to bring in March the District of Innovation, whether we go forward or we don't go forward. If we move forward on that same day, we want to approve the calendar or whether whether we are a district of innovation or not. We'll have a calendar to bring to you in March.
Okay.
So
Do you
that's the
think,
plan.
it would be possible, I did see the survey that was sent out, and I saw the survey being shared. I also saw some people responding to the sharing of the survey being like, what is this? I don't understand, right? So, because it was a little dense, which is great because it was super informative, but I think for people who are reading quickly in social media, it was a little dense, right? So I wonder if you might be able to resend that before the meeting and just include, a little blurb about that, whether or not we move forward, this will affect the 2024 school calendar, so that won't, just letting people know that it'll be forthcoming in March, and maybe that's something they want to pay attention to if they care about those things.
Yeah. No, most definitely. What we're doing right now, we're building it last week and then the storm happened, but we're building an FAQ based on the feedback.
Awesome.
Right, so we see some consistent questions coming in through the feedback. So we're going to create an FAQ on the website, send that out and say, here's some additional comments on a lot of the questions that are coming in. So we'll resend that, and then they'll be able to provide more feedback as well.
That's great. And if we can just let people know that, then we should be able to finalize the calendar.
Yes,
Thanks.
definitely.
Okay, so that was my first question. My second question is, could we get an update or brief during the academic update on the high school schedule as both pertains to the process of fixing the master schedule and what the timeline looks for that and where we are at in that process currently? And then also, could we get a report on what the high school schedule will look like next year and the academic rationale for why? It's my understanding that there might be several different schedules being considered that aren't exactly what we have right now, and maybe this isn't inaccurate, but if we could get an update on what next year is going to look like,
Find out when you find out.
and what it's going to look like and why, I think that would be great. In the past, the board has, while we don't make the decision necessarily on whether or not we have block schedules or we have 7 periods or we have 9 periods or whatnot, I think it's really helpful for us to understand what we're doing and why, and then the community also. So, and the earlier the better.
I'll send y'all, I thought I had sent y'all the update on the timeline of the master schedule.
And I
But I'll
think,
resend that because it was a while back.
Well, I just think bringing it up in the public
Yeah.
public forum would be great too.
yeah, I thought it included a February update for us, was my memory of it.
And my other request is that we receive an update in conjunction with the potential calling of an election to authorize the recapture. Could we get an update from legal on what options are available to the board in terms of us determining properties that we might consider de-annexing?
Yeah, I know the answer to that one, but I'll have legal put it in writing. We don't get a say as a district. TEA commissioner decides the properties, my understanding.
There was an option where we could detach property
Yeah.
that was presented to us, and I
You
think that that's
can
what Ms. Hall.
100% detach.
Yes, so I
They will
think
tell
that's
you
what
what
you're
you're
asking.
detaching.
That's not how it was presented to us.
Yeah.
So it was presented to us that there was an option where we could choose to detach
Right.
specific property.
So instead of having this conversation right now, can we invite the attorneys to the 13th and they can present it? Okay.
Yeah. Let's just get a definitive answer on what that looks like, what the options are, and have that at the meeting.
Yeah.
Yep. If we need to call Mr. Moran, let's call Mr. Moran, whatever we need to do to find out what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any agenda item requests? If not, I will entertain a motion.
Budget real quick.
Oh,
You wanna
sorry.
just talk to this, or
Trying
do
to
you
get y'all
want
outta
them to
here.
have it?
Oh.
I mean, it's just the timeline, right? You want them just to read it?
Sorry, y'all. I'm not in a rush, I promise. I thought we were done.
I mean, well, it shocked me for a minute because I was like, you took me off guard.
Good evening, Board. I shared with everybody on the dais a copy of this presentation. It's our board workshop, really a board workshop budget update for as we stand here February 6, 23. What we'll look at with this presentation is our revenue sources, how we get our revenue, do an update on that, what drives our budgeting process, how it all comes together, and then more importantly, our timelines. We really wanted to give our board an update on where we're at currently and where we see us moving throughout this semester. So real quick, what makes up a budget for those, if you want to recall or if you're not familiar, we have 3 revenue sources. Our state allocation that comes from TEA, coming from Tier 1 allocations, whether it be for specific programs, based on our ADA, based on weighted average daily attendance and what have you. Then our local tax collections, much like what Mr. Tiarina was talking about, how our property value and our tax collection percentage and how that affects and counterbalances our state allocation is another source of revenue. And finally, our federal revenues. That's not necessarily just our Title I grants, but it's like SHARs and other federal pieces of money that come in for specific federal programs. Our expenditures make up, obviously, our payroll costs, our contracted services, our supplies and materials, other operating costs, and also capital outlay. So revenues, revenue projections, I've been tracking this constantly. Every 6 weeks, I'm looking at our ADA, I'm looking at last year versus this year and how it all ties together, looking at the massive spreadsheet and putting out predictions on where we will finish this current year, and then also projecting out into the future, into next year. Previous tax collection data, along with preliminary tax appraisal reports, all factor into that revenue template. Want to keep in mind that we are early for next year's projection. Just last week, the 30th of January, where property values surveys came to us from our CADs, and so working with our CADs and honing in on getting that real accurate number is going to be a work in progress. Our certified tax rolls will come in August. Keep in mind, in June, we'll come to the board with a budget with tax rates that we propose, and then we would adopt them in August. At this point in time, the revenue projections are estimates, and everything you see here are estimates. And
Hold on 1 second, Mr. Doyle. Coach Walsh is out there walking out. We haven't wished him a happy birthday yet.
Happy birthday, Coach.
Yeah, you can go now. Hi, Coach.
Yeah, happy birthday, he's standing here.
put him on the spot. So anyways, back to we were talking, we're looking at past data trends and then also current data trends to help set that revenue template to give us a good, accurate point in time right now. So if you look here, our projections as of January, February with the data that we have, looking at next year, moving into next year, closing out 22-23, we're predicting that we'll have a revenue projection anywhere between 79 and 81 million, which is pretty close to what we were looking at earlier this year, about this time last year in August. And then we're looking at an early projection, very early projection of 23-24 of 81 to 83 million. A slight increase, but not too significant. We're really kind of staying at that 80-ish million, where we are seeing a trend of increased enrollment slightly. Our ADA is better than last year. We're looking at numbers instead of that 7,100, we're looking at 7,400. So we're seeing an increase in ADA. So that's would applaud academics and our staff on campuses and getting our kids into school and getting them involved there. I do want to point out and keep in mind that we are looking at a recapture projection of 6 to 7 million. Now keep in mind, we'll be able to net a portion of that with Tier 1 allocation, so we wouldn't be writing a check entirely for 6 to 7 million, but whatever's in excess of that foundation payment, we would have to cover. So it wouldn't be the total 6, but it would be a significant portion. That goes back into that Chapter 49 election and purchasing those attendance credits. So when you talk expenditure budget, how that ties in, we calculate our revenue. Now is the time that we're really putting our budget season into play. We're looking at student projections. We're looking at roll-up projections, program projections going forward into next year, tracking those students in, from one grade level up, and using those projections to help calculate our campus budget and also even our department budget as well, the budgets as well. So what drives that? Well, our administration team, consisting of Office Academics, HR, Finance, even operations side, we're collaborating, looking at even campuses on campuses, looking at what our needs are. Actually, this week, tomorrow and Wednesday, we have our first round of meetings with our principals to look at Title I and state comp allocations, looking forward into next year, and really setting the stage for those principals and campus leaders to start planning next year with what we are projecting right now. So that's going to be continuous work in progress throughout this month and into March. And this really carries us into the timeline, right? We're sitting in February. We've started the work, and really in December. I have January, but we really started looking at in December. And honestly, it never stops. I just kind of always look at this. That's how cool I am. That's fun. So looking at revenue projections in December, January. We're sitting here in February, again, looking at roll-up numbers, trying to get a good grasp on what those roll-up projections look like. Like I said, discussing Title I state comp projections, letting those campus leaders start the process there of thinking into next year, and also building our zero-based plan. It's our first version of basically everything that all the needs are identified, and we start putting a budgetary value to each of those needs. Moving into March, you can see that we're going to have an updated revenue projection with any kind of changes that are happening through the biennium, anything that we can hear about that we can tweak as we move forward. Then we want to publish those department budgets in March, meet with those leaders and make sure that we're covering all the needs and meeting all the needs. Look to publish those FTE allocations in cabinet, and then meet with principals again to review all the additional items, if there are any, that would need to be considered in the budget. In April, furthermore, basically confirming that everything within our budget is what we need and we want to move forward with. Also begin that procurement process early in April, so that way in June we can bring any kind of RFPs that we need or start budgeting for those large ticket items, so that way we can get them in and get them up and rolling by August, so our students and our teachers have access to, say, virtual programs and things. Then consider board recommendations for salary and any additional requests in April, with the goal that in June that we're able to bring forth a budget for our board to approve. Moving forward, other budget meetings that we'll have, you can see here on the 27th, we'll have an additional budget workshop overview of where we're at in the process. We'll tie in personnel. You'll hear a little bit from HR about where we're at in that process as well. And on the 6th of March, again, another update and overview of where we're at in the budget process. And anytime in this, in our processes, in our meetings, if you have questions, we're happy to navigate through those and have a conversation. And then by April 3rd, identify any kind of compensation or any kind of stipends that may come about. And again, by May 1, having a final review with our board, and including all compensation packages and stipend packages, so that way throughout May we can finalize our budget process and bring it to our Board of Trustees in June. And just real quick, I want to include a glossary of acronyms. I apologize if I threw out acronyms. It's
This is the best thing on your presentation, though, I got to tell you.
That's the best thing. Okay.
Sorry, I do like the glossary.
I just want to say that within every presentation that you give to us, it just gets better and better.
Oh,
like,
thank you.
I'm just very impressed with how well you have picked up everything with, your new job. And so, because I remember meeting you when you were in charge of the CTE building program.
Yes.
And so you have impressed me.
Well,
Good job.
appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
Now he's gonna come in late for work tomorrow.
Not at all.
Dr. Salmi?
I did have one request when we talk about, at the budget overview, when we talk about personnel and salaries. I think that for me personally, the stipend aspect of academic salaries is somewhat confusing. And so if you could include that, I'm not entirely sure exactly how, leave it up to you, right? Just to explain that, because I was only recently introduced to it, so I think it's important that everyone understand it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, if that concludes the presentation, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Shanks, Dr. Salmi with the second. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Cool, unanimous. Thank you all.